Okay, so this is about the rights-of-way, utilities, and public and private property, how they intersect. And we want you to use best management practices in every case with every entity. And so we're going to train the rights-of-way people to these best management practices, but know going forward that we are also going to be doing the same work with the private and the public entities, the state parks and so forth. You're getting the same information across the board. Again, we want you to review the fact that these names that are on this list are only a partial group names, but there's a lot of agencies, public agencies that interact with the work that you're doing. They're all on the same page with us, so we really have closed the loop in terms of this, and it's really about the workforce understanding that you have partners, 35 of them, in the work that you're doing. And our Gorse Action website is a huge resource for you guys. You're very busy, you've got to get X number of miles done. Private property owners, they need to be educated. It's not your job to do that. What we'd like to see you do is refer as much as you can to this Gorse Action website. It's scientific information. It's been checked by the Oregon Department of Agriculture. It's been approved for dissemination to other parties. It reaches across the board to everybody from a large rancher down to a small 100 by 100 lot. It gives organic practices, alternatives to herbicides, herbicide information, cost sharing information. There's just a ton of information there. So if you'll take with you when you leave, I'd love to see the bin that has the gag folders in it. I'd like to see that empty when you guys leave so you can put them on the dash of your trucks. And when you encounter somebody who says, what the heck, is going on here, you can hand that out specifically when it comes to gorse, but it's also effective for any of the noxious weeds we're encountering. Again, the main people that we're trying to reach here is education, obviously in gorse and other weed species. Sudden oak death, the Curry County people are in quarantine down there, but it's here in Coos County. I have it on my property. Lost 75 cedars, Port Orford cedars to it. It's important that you know what you're doing with soil specifically and the pathogens involved there. And then the productivity of these rights-of-way, as we return them to native species, what you're going to find is less maintenance. So if we can beat the gorse back or beat back the knotweed and things that tend to monoculture, what we'll have is a better diversity with a lower canopy and much easier to manage. And it won't require you to clean your equipment and all the things that you're currently having to do with these invasive weed species. So your actual dollars in the first 5 years may be higher, but your long range dollars will be better. And as I've worked with Coos Curry Electric a lot, they determined that it cost them like $15,000 to manage a Douglas fir through its lifetime with all the line trimming. If you just cut the tree down, you save all that money, and you can restore that with other types of vegetation that are lower and don't impede your line clearances. So that's just an example of one thing that we'd like to do, is to put back this diversity in the rights-of-way and easements so that we lower those dollars going forward and we end up with a habitat that we want, as well as fire suppression in those areas, specifically with gorse. And we can put it to work that way. So the main other thing that we're also trying to do is to really eliminate you having to go farther afield to get your continuing education credits, and also to give you information that's relevant so that what you are learning is something that you can apply to your everyday jobs. And I know continuing education is a burden. I have 9 licenses myself, so I can totally speak to that. I understand what that takes to do as far as managing that from an employer standpoint. So we're bringing it to you. I hope you'll take advantage of that. So you're our boots on the ground. We talked a little bit about that. You see this land that we don't see. It's important that your expertise and also the information that you have about surfactants, about herbicides, about different methods of pulling. I've learned a lot from my own excavators about using harrows and disking and field work in the ranchers to turn gorse under as it seeds up. I've talked to the Wall family and many other of our old Mackenzie's ranchers and learned a lot from them as to what to do and what to don't. And you guys are really the expertise that we have in the rights-of-way. So you can feed that information back to us and we will incorporate it, and we will monitor areas, and we will look and see if there's something new that we're missing. There's a lot of information internationally, But what we don't have is regionally specific information. And if we have different weather or we have different soil conditions, we have different operators and different machinery here that they're using in Australia, for example, you guys are really that conduit for information back to us. So it's a two-way street. So all of this is part of what we're trying to do with best management practices. We want to train you in this as much as we can, but it's really your personal responsibility to take care of it in your own companies and in your own utilities. And it's really you that are going to be the ones that report this problems that you see. If you have a contractor that's running dirty machinery in your city limits, try to get that information to somebody. We will give them a gentle nudge. We'll ask them to come to a class. We'll try to update them with some handouts and just try to get that turned around. We don't want to, get down on everybody about it, but the more that you're in the area with dirty equipment around you, the more you're going to have to keep doing the same job over and over again, which is really boring. You have a lot of work to do. So we'd like to see that eliminating the problem. So when you see the source of a problem, if you can bring it to us, whether it's an outlier or a dirty piece of equipment or a new area that we can't get to, let us know. We'll try and work it through. Sometimes we can use cooperative agreements that you maybe can't do or don't have the time for. So again, stopping the spread is the huge thing at this point. So we are really trying to curtail the flowering of the plant. That is a gigantic issue right now. So we want to knock this stuff down before it goes into serious flower in the next 60 days or so. So we're going to see a big winter bloom that we always see, starts in February. And just a tiny example of how this GAG group works, the very first meeting that we had about GAG, I sat next to a guy from Department of Forestry. And I leaned over to him and I said, hey, you guys do polygon mapping every few years for the Forestry Department, and they assess using ground radar and pictures what can be harvested in the state. And they do a very thorough job of that. And I said to him, is there any reason you can't fly that in January or February? And he said, no, it's a weather dependent thing. We could just move our schedule. And I said, if you did that, we would have great pictures of where the gorse is. And he did, and we do. And it was just that little thing. So if you think of the polygon mapping that we would have had to pay for in order to get this information and duplicate with the Department of Forestry already doing it, that is a huge jump forward in terms of collaboration. It just really shows you how you can borrow from another person's resources and just tweak them a little bit for your needs and make a difference. And that's a best management practice. And that is just a simple conversation with one person that got back to his boss, things got adjusted, and we got some great pictures and great inventories of gorse in full bloom. So again, these monocultures really stand out, but what we also have is a lot of outliers woven in and out of our native vegetation. And so we need to isolate those areas and get them under control. So we're asking you to work in two sectors. One is the large areas. We're going to have to tackle them as a long-term plan. The small areas, we're going to have to deal with them as outlier populations. That's where your equipment and your boots and your trucks get into trouble. It's when you touch these small areas and then continue on. And if you can gather your groups together in the dirty areas and do all the work in that area and catch the outliers at the same time, you're going to have better results for that. So what we're really trying to do is preserve the native species. So one-all mowing is not great. So your guys that are operating the equipment, it's really important to relieve the burden on the native vegetation by removing the invasive, but to keep the native vegetation if it's meeting your clearances and off the roadway and all that. We don't want to lose our willows, our alders, or other things that are in that area because they're going to seed in and take over for shade and help crowd out the other problems that we're having. So we're wanting not just willy-nilly mowing, we want some selective use of that. We need those other grasses and so forth. We also like to see if you can possibly reseed immediately with perennial ryegrass. That is a very effective way to get an instant cover in bare areas. And when you're using your masticators and mulching, you're going to leave behind a nice fluffy powder there that is going to be loaded with seed. That will suppress, but it'll also support, because it's nitrogen rich, it'll also support regrowth of perennial ryegrass, which is extremely easy to control. If you're a rights-of-way person, you know that that's the least of your problems is perennial ryegrass. We want to put that land to work. That's the reason why. Perennial ryegrass is a nitrogen fixer, which gorse also is, and many of these other plants like broom also are. So when you put that land to work and take it out of the fallow status, what you end up with is a really good, happy environment. And right away, you're getting a replacement for that nitrogen fixing in the ditches and rights of way. So this is a tragedy that happened up at the Grassy Knob Wilderness. This is a really great example of how our forestry guys are being impacted by this. And this is now a huge problem with hunting and for other reasons up there. It's also in the quarantine area for SOD. So this is a place where any of you lived here many, many years ago. Kurt Ketzler's and a few other families that have been in this area a long time. These are old traditional hunting and fishing grounds that have been corrupted by problems that got away from us. So, and a lot of this was poor management practices back in the day when they logged it off the first time. So some of it is often blamed on utilities. We hear all the time that the BPA created a yellow brick road to through Curry County when they went through and did their original mowing. So, you know, we hear that from people. We'd like to see all of you become part of the solution in terms of that. And just know that you can impact an area like this really quickly and take a beautiful area and turn it bad pretty quickly. So again, this is a big issue. It's kind of huge. We know you're in the field. The topography is not always good. One of the things we want you to do is to start having some kind of a real recognition about soil, particularly because it's a carrier of pathogens as well as seed and root systems, because there's also nodules along the root systems that have all the genetic material for some of these plants like broom and like gorse. And so whether it's the back of your shovel or the full-size track hoe, it matters where you go and what you do with that piece of equipment. And we totally get just how difficult that is to clean, but I also know how easy that is to clean. And that is operated with a guy with boots, and the treads on his boots are just as important. You will be about 2 feet from the plant in this situation, and you might be 25 feet from the plant here. So you're going to be standing right in the seed bank using a shovel. Okay, so you understand that. Here's your pickup trucks, right? And you guys got ones that look like that. So that's a walking sod and weed seed vector machine right there. Going home at night to your house first, and then going to the wash station the next morning when you have time, for example. So those are some of the issues that we have. You know, we know how muddy it is. We know how remote some of these areas are. But literally, this is a previously forested area. It may have had gorse in it at the time that it was forested. This is a prime example. We see a lot of this with ATV and recreation. And this is another place where we're doing education. So the ATV guys are also transporting this in and out of the dunes. And they are often going home to Eugene, Roseburg, and other places. So we're working hard in the state parks and places where the trails were for ATVs. And also ranch managers would understand this, because they would move from a dirty to a clean area on their own ranch and spread it within the own ranch using ATVs or even the coat of their McNabb, dogs that are managing the sheep or whatever. We're transferring it lots of different ways. So we really just want you to be a little more aware when you've been in a bad area of what you could possibly encounter. And these are just a few of the things that we now understand, especially in our area, especially with the gorse plant, which is so stickery, that this is one of the ways that we can transport gorse, or all these different methods just within our own community. These are machines that are used every day in our area, very common. So when you review your rights of way for mowing plans, you need to think about these best management practices in that review. You need to have a strategy for how you're going to get in and get out in one piece without bringing the whole piece of the planet that you were just on with you. So we really want you to look at your right of way, not just as I got to get this knocked down, or I got to get these clearances in. But you also want to look at it for how are you going to manage the whole picture from milepost to milepost, clean to dirty. What can you get done in an 8-hour day? Where's the machine going to go when it leaves there? What's your strategy for that? And with ODOT, what we've got them doing now is mowing the clean areas on both sides of the highway. Normally we go all the way down one side and then come all the way back the other side. Well, what they're doing now is they're mowing clean areas on both sides of the highway, moving their flaggers and their signs and cones, and managing a whole section at a time on both sides, and then moving down to the next section. And they're mowing their clean and skipping, and then they're making their trip back doing dirty. So they're going from dirty to dirty site then as they're coming back, and then they're hitting alternately on the alternate sides. So you want to skip the sections that are infested so you don't have to clean until the very end. That will help you. And you want to blow off the equipment even if you're just moving onto the highway or crossing the highway. You may want to look at a quick blow, especially if the soils are dry in the summer. Quick blow to try and get as much material as you possibly can. There is a plant that you're going to look at when Erin gets here. Hopefully she'll have some great pictures today of this Japanese knotweed and the Himalayan knotweed. That plant, if you mow it, we are really going to be in a world of hurt, especially if you mow it in a ditch or anywhere that water ponds or settles. That thing is just going to take off. So it's really important to know your weeds and to know which ones you're mowing and not mowing and why, and understand that. So it's really important to get across to you. We have it all at the North Fork intersection, the confluence of the Coquille River, steelhead fishing up there, and it is terrifying. It's on one side, it got off the highway and onto the side of the river, and it traveled across the river and down the river, and it's from the point of contact at the upper end, just like we see at Elk River with gorse, it's traveled downstream. So like the Mackenzies and the people that are at the lower end of Elk River only got that because it was planted just above the Marsh Ranch on the upper end of the Coquille River. So, or the Elk River. So the Coquille River is experiencing the same problem with knotweed. We already have it down in the area of the Myrtle Point boat ramp, and then there's lots of people coming and going from there, and they get it on their trucks and off they go. So you can really see how it's important to know your weeds. And then keeping track, as I said, on the dashboard of your notes for next time, and what is it that you need to do at the next go round, and what did you do wrong, or what did you encounter from last go round. That really helps, and it helps a supervisor get that done. So in this situation, this is a patch of gorse that we tackled, but we did the whole area with a masticator prior to this, and then we cleaned this patch last, and we left a pretty good buffer zone of about 10 to 15 feet, because anybody who's worked around broom or gorse will tell you that those pods open when they dry, and they shoot the seed out about 10 feet in an area. So you just kind of need to know a little bit about your plants as you're going forward. Here's a picture that Bear had, but this really shows exactly what happened. Guess who had dirty equipment when they were doing their logging there? So that's exactly what happened. Somebody had a piece of equipment, a yarder, loader, something that was in there, and they got enough weed seed in there to get that patch to go, and now we've got what we call a monoculture surrounded by good forestry. If you have a ground fire, we've had fire science guys look at this, and if you have a ground fire, what you'll have is you can't get ahead of it in a gorse field like that. And so even if you were containing it in the forestry portion of it, these are, they call them leap zones. And we have those all through the city of Bandon, these leap zones and these monocultures. And so you can really get a good hot fire. So you refuel a slow fire by running it through gorse is what you do. So you have a managed fire that you can handle, like the one that we just had out at North Bank. But now you have a managed fire that is no longer managed when it hits a fuel source that has 80% biofuel in it, which is what gorse has. Broom burns close to as hot, but gorse is the hottest that we found. So choosing where you're clean is really a critical piece of this. We know that everybody has limitations on that, and they have to transport the vehicle home for the security of the vehicle and all of that. But the more you can clean, even with a blower at the site that you're mounting your low boys or whatever, or the more you can not road the piece of equipment back and forth over the city streets or near storm sewers or whatever, all those are areas where you're going to leave material behind. And so at the very least, if you can blow, we'll get a percentage off. If you can load, you get a percentage off. But then wherever you park the lowboy and the dump truck also matters, because now you've also contaminated your other larger piece of equipment. So you might want to really, as you park that piece of equipment and get ready to stage in an area, can you look at the area itself and determine how to least contaminate the equipment the best, and how to set it up so that your mount and dismount doesn't create an issue going forward. And there's places where I hunt way up Sixes River, way off of 070 and in BLM areas and places like that, where I can literally see outlier populations that are literally in the dismount from a piece of equipment. And you can see the circle that you make when you first come off and you need to turn the machinery out, and then you can see a diminishing gorse patch going out the logging road wherever that piece of equipment was going to go. So you see that up at the tops of all of these the big staging areas where they put the heavy equipment that they're going to be using. They stage it all in an area before they start logging. We see those outlier areas after the trees are 30 feet tall. The gorse is 10 to 15 feet tall in that area, and it really follows the same exact pattern of the tracks when it's moving. So if you can, clean where the weed already exists. That is obviously the very best. So portable water truck is a great way to do that in an area, as long as you're not going to spread that contaminant with hydraulic fluids and other things that are on your machinery, grease, into one of our native creeks or whatever. If you can keep it in an area and it's an area that you visit frequently, or you can determine some areas along your routes or your rights of way that are good for that, you can share with ODOT because they already have contaminated sites. You can create regional zones within the city abandoned for each of these districts. We're working on one for District 1 where we're going to ask the tribe if we can use an area by the sewer pump plant down there, and we can dump all of the hand-cut gorse in that area, grind it all in one location, run all our equipment there. So if you can do that as you're going through and pick a site anywhere at the city shop or up at the water treatment plant or whatever, that's the spot, then that one spot is going to be the place that you're going to be monitoring and looking for contaminants. But if you move that piece of equipment or clean that piece of equipment in 50 different locations, you now have spread your own workload farther. So it's really important to kind of get a plan, a management plan for that. And I think a lot of people will share wash stations, and so I think we need to figure that out. I think if the city abandoned has a slab and there's somebody working in the area, and then liability can be worked out, and the water load can be worked out, or if somebody owns a water truck, for example, and it's not fire season, and it's not in use, can that fire truck come down and sit where some of the contractors are, and can the city abandon, for example, give us the water to make sure we don't spread out of the area? So there's lots of ways we can partner with that with different pieces of equipment. And then there's some independent operators that have their own cleaning businesses now that are going to the sites and washing trucks for guys on nights and weekends. We also have some portable trailer units that have arrived in Bandon that can be accessed, and you can contract specifically to borrow or rent that trailer for a short period of time to do multiple pieces of machinery if you know you're in a really bad area. So again, keeping it close to the work site, really keeping it away from water and storm drains if you can. Please bag or net your areas or have separation tanks available when you are using the sewer system. And try and use your filtration bags and catch that, and then be responsible about where you dump that load that builds up against that. Your street sweepers are another issue. They pick up a ton of seed. And so the street sweeper cleanings, where those go, it's important for that to have a designated place and that to be under a monitor site. So these now become integrated pest management contact areas, we call that. And the important thing is to not drive through there if it does sprout, not drive through that and contaminate another place. So that's where your spray applicators would be keeping an eye on that and regularly addressing it when it comes up, because those are going to be small seeds that are going to come up quickly in that situation. So the how-to of this is air first, always air first if you can. For one thing, you're not using water. Secondly, you can get all the light stuff out of there and get it out of the way. It's a deep cleaning that we're after. Then your air compressors give you a little more blast of power there if you're near some place that has electricity. Water trucks, and then pressure washers last, and to get into all the nooks and crannies. So if you can kind of go in that route, it'll lessen your pressure washer time, which everybody knows is the real time consuming, and the water using, and the employee part of it is the pressure washing phase. So if the operator can blow when he's at the site and then load it that way, if you can get it back to the shop and hit it with air, and then break out the water at the last, and finally the pressure washing is your last resort in that, but it's clearly the most effective. These are some models of wash stations. We're actually working towards this. It's going to take a collaborative agreement We have some sites that are kind of on our radar that we think might work. This is a long-range plan. If a couple of you entities can aggregate together, we're concerned about the county road department because they have to go back to Coquille, which is in pretty good shape for gorse. So we don't like to see it go back if we can to farther east. It's getting more acclimated. We've seen it in Elk River or Elkton and in Douglas County. And we've seen it in Lane County and the eastern portions of Lane County. So we're not anxious to move it to the east. If the county roads department could make a cooperative agreement with the city of Bandon, it would be great if they could have some machinery cleaned in this area. It would be a great example of a way to do that. Cooskary Electric as well is another one that crosses that boundary. Can the electric utilities gang up together maybe and share that equipment, or could we put a wash station in that the county maybe does maintenance on and Cooskary Electric puts the infrastructure in? ODOT is a partner in that. Funding is always an issue, but the more that we can show more than one user and more than one collaborator in it, the more likely we are to get funding. So when we go looking for grants, they want to know, is this going to serve one person or many people? And who's going to take care of it, and how is it going to support itself? So if we do get a wash station here, what it'll be is a swipe card, and every entity will have one, and you'll be able to have an account, and it'll show how long you were there, and you can have a record for that. So if we have to crack down on best management practices, this would be your get out of jail free card. That you went to the wash station, you did your due diligence, you put your time in, you got that done. And I don't know if that'll ever get to that, but Oregon Department of Ag is getting pretty freaked out about the gorse situation statewide. They're getting really nervous because we have not handled it locally, and it's our turn to take that on and get it going. And they do have the right to really crack down on that. And I've seen it done in hay fields in some places in Eastern Oregon where they had to do that, and it's not pretty when they have to put in that kind of management. It's up to the people doing the work really to keep that from happening. So water is a huge highway for this, and one of the things that people say is, well, gorse holds my bluff, right? So you're going to encounter that as we go through, especially the city stuff. You might encounter it in the embankments where people say, well, I'm going to have runoff. The reality is that every piece of vegetation, broom, gorse, whatever, drips its seed into the ditch, and the ditch carries it to the next location. It crosses the road on a culvert, and you'll see it aggregating around your culverts and places like that. So what we have is both a place for contaminants that are on the machinery itself to get into our water system, which is not a good thing, but also a place for seed, soil, and roots, including sudden oak death, to make a transfer into our waterways. And we have enough problems as it is. We don't need to make that worse. So using water conservatively for lots of reasons is a good idea, but really knowing your site is a huge part of that. So we really want to make sure you guys are mindful of where that water goes, because it's a ton of gallons. If you plan a big excavator, you've done it, you know it. It's a lot of water. So here's a few of the things that we think as we raise awareness in the community that may come back on you. And we want to warn you, because as we're training the public and there's more gorse action going on, there's more compliance officers, they're going to come back on the rights of way people. Well, the county's not doing a good job. The city's not doing a good job. So what we want to do is have you be visible now, specifically in District 1 would be really useful, and get you out in front so that you are not able to be blamed for their problem. So clearly underground or overhead, pedestals, mounts, fire hydrants, anything that's buried in gorse should be shown up in December and early January and made into a priority. And the sewer treatment plant's a great example. You have every kind of weed possible growing in that perimeter of the fence right there at the sewer treatment plant. But right next door to you is Moore Mill, who had 8 acres of gorse, and voluntarily, just through a little chat that I had with Jeff Miller in the grocery store on a Sunday morning, tackled that, turned it over, seeded it, and has got a handle on 8 acres right in the city limits in District 2. Just got on it. So like I'm saying, it sort of spreads negatively and positively in both directions. If they see you out there, they're going to be able to say, oh, well, the city's getting after it. My turn now because I butt up to that. If you can do them a little favor, clear a little further, if the new cat machine is out there and you can bust a little trail to give you a little wider sector. It takes you 5 minutes with that head on there to do somebody a little honeydew if they've got a tiny little patch. If you can afford to do that, try to do that. Just raise awareness, throw a gag website brochure in the front door, and let us know. The power lines go all over the place in all kinds of terrain, and we know that. And it's really difficult. You've got a lot of clearances overhead that you're worried about. But we have now very good drone footage of the city abandoned and the Coos County area. And honestly, it is the power lines, the unreachable power lines that are the last strongholds for some of these monocultures. And they're infiltrating our forest areas and our U.S. Fish and Wildlife areas and our state park boundaries. And so because those utilities get to all those places, it's important that we sort of have a plan. You're not going to get to it in this year. We know that. You're not maybe going to get to it next year. But start looking at those issues where you've had to abandon it for whatever reason, and see if you can't put it on your priority list to at least get control in the seed portion of this. So the big tall plant that's producing millions of seeds is our problem, alongside the vector or the routes or the creeks or ditches. And if you can get that down and get that under control for us, then you'll be dealing with something that can be followed up with a spray subcontractor, for example, and you'll have that vegetation down. You'll also be out of the lawsuit factor with your fire if you had a line down. Also, if we did have a fire and Lanny and the crew needed to go in there, they'd have better access because that power grid goes where the fire, where they normally can't get to. So it would help give us a corridor of a way to get in there and be able to see. It also provides a fire break. If a private property owner hasn't done their job, your easement gives us a fire break and gives us a chance for us to get control in those areas. So there's multiple reasons to do it, especially with this new fire awareness that we have. ODOT is doing an awesome job on Highway 101 north and south. They're on it like a bonnet. They got it going on. They got great partnerships going with the other utilities now. We're starting to see Jensen's working for City Abandoned and for Coos County Electric. We're starting to see that networking over the last couple of years that we've been trying to get. So now the same guys aren't spraying the same plant. Two different guys aren't spraying the same plant twice, They can see when it's mowed, but they don't often see when it's sprayed. So now we have people not duplicating services, and money dollars go further. Everybody's happy. We're getting better results. The county roads primarily run east and west. When you encounter an area like that, if you can connect with them, we've got county guys in the room now with us. We're really happy about that. And we can connect them up with the watershed people and the soil and water conservation people. I think that they can make those county dollars go further. One of the problems with a lot of the county roads is they have so much gravel to maintain that really slows them down. Paved surfaces are one thing, that's one problem, but gravel roads are gigantic vectors, and there's a lot of traffic on those roads to get to recreation areas and everything, and they're just tough to handle. I mean, they're just a lot of work, and so they lose a lot of money just in maintaining gravel. So if we can help them out, especially intersections and places in and out of problem areas. So cross-education is the best thing we can possibly do. If you guys could help each other in your workforce or new employees coming in and try and get some of this across to them, that'd be really useful. I don't want to be the one that always has to do that, but I would come to any individual road crew, business, or whatever, and give I have 40 lectures. So I can give a lecture for a safety meeting. We can do it specific to a certain weed. We can do ID, other things like that, and really work through problems that you're having in your district or your area specifically. And GAG has resources from lots of other people that can teach besides myself. So Oregon State University has people that we can send out, Oregon Department of Ag as well. If you encounter big, difficult areas you don't know how to treat, we have a gal, Carrie Perosco, who's the Southwest Regional Coordinator for Oregon Department of Ag. She's awesome. She's a gal, drives an F-350 pickup truck. She's got a spray tank in the back. She knows her weeds. She'll come over, she'll talk to big management issues, and she'll discuss some of the best ways that things can be done. She can also bring that back to the Oregon Department of Ag, which will help you with grant money going forward, to let us know that we can get ahead of something. We need dollars here, and she can help pinpoint that for you. Again, if we can get some utility mailings in, we're going to start raising awareness. Bear's been sending out his letters. Where people are going to see Richard out and about doing his job. Hopefully less than Bear's doing his job, and we'll have more compliance and less of that. But if you can kind of like just when you see the guys doing gorse clearing in Bandon, if you can just pop in and just say, hey, there's some great classes going on, there's a bunch of brochures, point them to the GAG website. There's still a lot of guys to get. We have a contractor licensed vetted contractors with insurance list that's over here. So we want to see people get on that list and get to these classes. So you might tell other people about that you're getting this education, and you suggest that they get it as well. That way you're not arguing about what's the best way to do it, because everybody's getting the same thing. Again, here's your EDRR information. There's multiple apps on how to do this. I would say easiest for you is to call the GAG line and report at One Stop Shopping. Sherry will deal with it at that end. It'll get into the hotline somehow. If it needs to get to the state, it will. And you can report it to your boss as well when you do any of this hotspot type stuff. The other thing that really is important with best management practices is we talk a lot about gorse here, but they're not all the same. Each of these weeds needs a different type of treatment, and each one of them maybe responds to a different herbicide. So it's really hard when you have a big tank and you're just hitting the right of way to say, oh, well, this would do better with imazapyr, not triclopyr. You just can't have everything on your truck with you. But you can make a note, and you can change equipment and change your surfactants and change what you're doing and come back to it if you can't. You can also have a smaller tank of a backpack sprayer or something that has imazapyr in it. So if you did see knotweed and it was leafed out, you could hit it in the fall and take a small problem and keep it from being a big problem. So anyway, there's lots of ways to get creative with that. Gorse and blackberries are responding really well to mowing first. One of the things we have here is an example. This is the broom that's been plucked out of the ground, and you can see the ratio of the root system to the smallest plant there is about the same as the top. That is a really effective time to spray with a very small amount of herbicide. So what you have is a 1-to-1 ratio between the top and the bottom of the plant. And the top of the plant will conduct enough herbicide to kill the immature root system pretty quickly at that level. That's why we like to see these things sprayed to 12 to 18 inches. And that's why we want you to mow them down as quick as you can with all this fancy equipment y'all own. Get it down. So we stop the seed production. If you're masticating, you'll be turning up seed that's already laid on the soil, and that sprout will begin to happen. When that sprout happens, we also have these new biocontrol agents, the thrips. They can work, if they get effective in this area, they can work at a lower level than mature gorse can, and we're out of the woody. You're also suppressed your fire issue when you've done that. You've gotten it down, got the actual vegetative material down and solved the problem. Public perception is improved. You're very busy. You made a big pass. Everybody can see what you're doing. So when you get into this, knowing that if you can get that knockdown, it's going to give you 3 to 6 months before you got 12 to 18 inches you're going to have to deal with. So in your budget, if you can get into a cycle where you get this big stuff down, then next year you're going to have a much reduced removal. You can respray in that, or you may need to masticate another time in that second round with that. But again, you have that crown to top ratio working in your favor. So you're going to be using less herbicides, more effective to that root system. Once you get to the second broom right here, look at how much top you've got. And there's very little foliage on gorse and on broom, and you've got to get all sides of that foliage. So you're now dealing with a root base there that's 1/3, and you've got 2/3 top. Well, you're going to kill the top for sure. But by the time it's gone through the top, can the vascular system get it all the way down to the bottom? Probably not, or not as deep. Now you've got a lateral rooting going on, and you've got a different scenario in that case. So again, you're kind of out of the zone here where your effectiveness is getting to be lost. If this was a gorse plant, it'd be multi-trunked for sure, probably, if you'd mowed it once. And now you've got yourself a huge issue. Now you've got that big top that can catch fire, that can look bad, public perceptions, got a ton of seed on it, more difficult to manage, much more staging area needed, more transport needed, more bulk, it's impossible to load in a truck. All those things going on. But look at that little dinky root system down there. That's kind of what gorse looks like. So when people say that it's a great erosion control, it's actually not that good. And the really viable hairline roots that do the work of the plant, they're pretty minuscule. When you pluck them out, you leave them behind. And in some cases, you're actually leaving behind the nodules, the nitrogen fixing nodules in there, and you're creating a new plant because they have the genetic code to kind of go forth from there. And if you just cut them off, they can come back from the crown. And so now you're dealing with that crown. If you can get that crown when it's that size, you're going to get a 1-to-1 ratio between the root system and the crown of the plant. So it really does, this spot treatment idea really does work if you're using it at the right time. Timing is huge when it comes to spray applications. And not wasting your energy on all this mastication and mowing and plucking and, you know, hauling and cutting and cut stump and everything, because you're putting all that energy into removing a much larger plant. If you're doing that repeatedly in small ways, you're going to find that it actually goes faster, and especially like the skid steers and the masticators, they can blaze through there with the small stuff pretty quick. And it takes a while to get the RPMs up and to get that bigger stuff all the way through the wood and all the way through that top foliage to really get it ground fine. So the things we want you to remember is morning glory and knotweed, they like a good spray, they do not want a good mowing. That's the difference right there. That's one of the things. With gorse, grind it if you can. If you start plucking it, you might get into cultural sites. So the more you can knock it down before reseeding, the better off you'll be. If you can pull broom plants, these are just hand pulled by Craig, my husband, pulled them right out of the sand. And so they will give way to you. If you can pull them, that's awesome. And if you can get that dead vegetation out of the area that you're working in and get it removed out of the area or ground finally, what that's going to do is going to give you access to that new growth. It's also going to make it less of a trip hazard for your spray applicators if they're on foot. So if you can get that terrain leveled out for them, you're going to be going back over that once a year or twice a year for the next 5 years. It's going to matter to you if it's flat and level and the obstacles are out. So whatever you can do to stop it from growing, blooming, or seeding, or spreading, that's primarily what you're doing. So no matter what the weed is, that's the technique that you're using. So if you don't allow it to see the light of day, it can't do photosynthesis. So keeping it knocked down or keeping it sprayed is a really great way to do that. So if you, that's how exactly how these biocontrols work, is they just keep sucking the sugars out of the plant, and eventually the plant just gets weaker and weaker because it has to send all that sugar down to the root system. So if you're not allowing photosynthesis to happen on this plant, it's just going to weaken over time, even if you didn't use herbicides. So you can explain that to people. The way that you control gorse organically is to just not let it see the light of day every time a seedling comes up or whatever. So disking and harrowing works really well in pastures because you're constantly letting that seed bank sprout and you're turning it under. And then repeatedly keeping the new seed bank and the root bank from regenerating is really important. So that's where we're saying one and done doesn't work here. You're going to have to come back at it. And then finally using your herbicides when the vegetative area and the top and the bottom of the root mass are about equal. That's when you can visualize what that root system is down below. That's when you want to get after it. So again, in grinding, dirty zones, clean zones, keep those separated. Try not to mix your areas. Keep your grinding heads at high RPMs when you're actually in the gorse, or in broom or whatever. Randy will tell you this: the higher the RPM, the more effective that is. You can start out slow, but if your machine is eating up your RPMs and using your hydraulics, you're not getting that fine mulching that you're going to get at higher RPM. So you really got to go over a few different passes to really get it ground up the way that you want it, because you're going to be walking back through all those sticks later multiple times, and you're going to be leaving sticks behind and crowns behind that are going to come back and haunt you later on. So the more you can grind to the ground and grind at high RPMs, the better you'll be. And grinding evenly matters, so you don't have any limb lengths that are showing. Once you're finished grinding, either load up to return to the shop or clean it in place away from drainage. Again, we're on you about it. If you spray, plan to have enough herbicide to do the whole area at one time in the right weather conditions. So a lot of people don't quite finish, and then you got the whole problem starting over again. So really try to manage when you're doing that plan, when you're doing your first walkthrough and you've seen an area, get a plan. Try to figure out how many gallons, how big is this plant? Do we need to knock it down first and come back next year? Or is it small enough and this is the first spraying, we're gonna need more herbicide than the second spraying, for example. So really looking at that right away, picking a plan for it, and then enacting the plan and giving enough materials and resources to it. And you're not going in and out of a dirty site again because you had to go back a second time. And then, of course, we want you to look for your off-spray issues. We're not hammering that down. You guys are good pesticide applicators. You understand that, but you are working next to cranberry bogs, the public, highway, everything. And volatilization is an issue. Vastland is much less volatile than the Garlon products. So you may want to try experimenting with that in areas where you think there's a potential for the weather to change. That's our new tool in the toolbox. And then checking your surfactants and making sure that everything is the right product for use near water. And you may be on dry land for quite a bit of your deal, but the last part of the day you're going to be in a ditch. So do you need 2 tanks, or are you going to change your product, or what are you going to do? You know, got a plan for that. Again, when you pull and stack, it's important to cut and pile. Kind of an idea, the pile matters because that's a huge, big pile of seed bank for you. So you want to cut as low to the ground. We found with cut stump that it almost works better to get that top off of it and leave a long length of that floppy gorse down there, and go back with your hand crew and cut that again. For cut stump, if you're running a machine, you might want to go through fast once and then go back through it again, and then have an applicator walk over that to try to catch crowns, especially on embankments where you can't get everything. It's really hard to cut stump and cut fast enough when you're trying to deal with actual top material in your way. And then keeping the transportation to a minimum, really important, and also all the tools that you use that day. It's not just the machinery, it's the tools that you also had. And then if you can grind piles on site, like at these ODOT rights of way or in your special little zones that you make within your work areas, if you can grind that, do so. If you are going to burn, think seriously about it. Really think seriously. Talk to your rural fire departments, talk to your city crews, make sure all the volunteers aren't away for the weekend, on a holiday weekend. We had some bad experiences with fires rekindling. And all of these fire stories that you hear from the old timers about the original Bandon fire ain't nothing besides the one that's going to happen now, because gorse has quadrupled in Bandon since that time. So we have way more fuel than we had back in those days, and way more structures than we had back in those days. And if anybody knows anything about fire science, or is one of our great volunteers on our, you know that houses now melt, they don't burn because they got so much plastic in them. So these are hotter, different fires than we used to have, and the potential in Bandon for these $1 million homes, our bluffs and our monocultures to catch fire simultaneously, while another fire is also going on east of us, because we're likely to also have fire conditions coming from the east our way. This is a massive event. It's a game changer. You can't refer to the old fire as what kind of fire we used to have. It's not like that anymore. This is the new fire. So again, we want you to contact the Coquel Indian tribe if you plan on plucking, especially if you're in certain areas. You should call Cassandra, and she will literally say to you, what's the address? And she'll say, no worries. We don't have anything there. She knows where everything is, pretty much. If you turn up something that looks suspected, stop. It's going to slow you down, but you can leave that area, go somewhere else. The tribe will take over at that point, but it's important not to get in the bag with them as somebody who just plucks and pulls material in a known cultural site, because they will dog you and follow you because they know that you're not being respectful to those sites. So Port Orford and Bandon both have a lot of sites, and some of the up to some of the rivers as well. Again, we want you to monitor, monitor, monitor. It's not a one and done. I'm going to hammer you guys about this, looking for your stobs sprouting, missed plants on the margins, new seeds that are definitely going to come up. There's millions of seeds. They're viable for more than 75 years. They're going to come up. And then look where your trucks, your tracks, and your boots have all traveled. Okay, so go back and look at that. So if you're in charge of a right-of-way like this, always remember to keep your clean and dirty, standardize your plant use and size if you can, so that you can go back and do the same treatment all the way across there. Try to catch your strays at your intersections and places where the vectors are going to matter. And then also communicate with your overlapping property owners as you're going through. Let them know, hey, we're coming back, or we'll be here next year to spray. Let them get their ducks in a row. They might spray before you get back. That would be awesome. Try to keep out of the top scenario there if you can. And watch these ponds, because this is the cranberry growers, and these gorse areas and areas like this may be part of their water source. And if they get tested with something in there that they can't, they're going to shut down their whole operation, lose their entire crop. So it's really important to be respectful of that. And so, you can see about what that all looks like. So when you see a new problem, again, we've been over this, we really need this EDRR. You can flag areas with flagging tape so that it makes it easier for the next guy to come along. I've given some pretty crazy descriptions of where I found stuff, next to the stump near the shoe tree, right by that good fishing hole. But they can get there. If you can get GPS coordinates, that would be great. And then try to keep equipment out of that area and where you found that little pocket, because it can be hidden inside of a whole bunch of good vegetation that's under your power lines or whatever. And what'll happen is you'll blend it all together, and eventually your whole right of way will be a problem. So it's going to have to be really part of the herbicide thing that you guys figure that out on your own. We're going to give you some guidance today. Erin's going to talk about these different weeds and what they respond to, correct?
Yes.
Yes, so she's going to give you some serious one-on-one. We really want you to start assessing your site as a whole. That is a huge piece of that. Instead of getting tunnel vision, really look at the whole right-of-way that you're dealing with, the whole problem you're dealing with, the neighbors on both sides, the type of equipment you own, just everything that's in that whole picture. And then some of these herbicides do one thing, some of these herbicides do another. We really want you to remember always to read your labels. Also, that's true with the surfactants. They act differently. The test area that we have down at the demo site, we tested every concoction known to mankind down there on gorse. And we found out some very surprising results. And all of those concoctions are listed on the signs in front. So if you have a question about a potential cocktail that you're working up, you can look and see how it works on gorse after 2 years on that site down by Currydale Farms. Again, here's your crown to root ratio. I really want to hammer that through. We see a lot of wasted herbicides in rights of way because it's just time to spray and we didn't mow first. It's not the right time to spray, or we already missed the seed and flowering part of it, so we're spraying after the barn door still, we're closing the barn door after it's already left. Knowing which equipment to use, having the right piece on your truck and knowing, what you're getting yourself into, all this goes back to that plan concept. And then looking at your stobs and your resprouts, it's really easy to walk away and not see this little guy's coming back. But also taking that close look at the stobs and the resprouts, you're likely to see whether your pollinators are out at the same time. So they're much busier at certain times of year, much busier at certain times of the day, certain seasons, and so try to keep an eye on that for us. These are some of the weeds that we have here that Erin's going to go over with you. They look different at different times of year, but you can carry a tank sprayer on your truck with you. We want you to identify the plants first, which is why Erin's going to speak. You really need to know what you're spraying. And then again, these same things that we're hammering into you, humidity, wind drift, pollinators, all that stuff that you get in every single class, we want you to be reminded that there's a reason for that. It also impacts the ability for the land to return to its rightful place.